Good.
Hi, everybody. This is Alyssa Frick here.
Good.
I'm the occupational therapist here at Windreach, Bermuda. And I want to welcome you all for coming today. And thank you, Sarah, so much for that beautiful introduction. Started us off right. So what we'd like to do first with everyone, we want to see who's here. Could we pull up our multiple choice poll question? We just want to get an idea of who's joining us today. So if you could put in there, what would you categorize yourself as? An individual living with a disability, an educator, healthcare professional, parent or guardian, just community interests, or other? We also have a second question there. Do you identify as someone living with a disability? And we'll give that a moment up just to see, who's on our call. We're excited for anyone who's on the call, but we would love to know who you are.
Good.
All right, we'll give that another 10 seconds. It looks like most people have got their answers in. Okay, we can go ahead and end that poll. And we'll share those results with you guys. So it looks like we have, someone in every category here. We have lots of people who are living with a disability, as well as educators, lots of healthcare professionals, interested from the community, and a few others. And then we have about 14% who identify as someone living with a disability, and about 86 that do not identify that way. So thank you so much for answering our poll. And we'll start with our introduction of Phyllis Harshaw, who is doing our first session on the history of disability in Bermuda. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Phyllis. Phyllis was born in Bermuda at the age of 8 years old. Her left arm was amputated above the elbow due to an injury. After a few years later, she was diagnosed with hereditary retinal degeneration. By the age of about 14, she was classified as legally blind. Currently, she has limited peripheral vision. Refusing to attend a school for disabled persons, Phyllis had to create and develop her own modifications during her school career. She attended Cavendish Hall School, Whitney Institute, and Bermuda College before going overseas. She attended Adelphi University in New York, where she obtained a Bachelor's of Science degree in education and a master's degree in learning disabilities. A few years later, she received a dual master's degree in Management and Human Resource Development from Webster University, Missouri. Phyllis was a special education teacher in Bermuda government schools for 36 years, where she has taught students with a variety of disabilities. The students ranged in levels from kindergarten to the final year of high school. For the last 20 years, her teaching career, she was at Cedar Academy as a learning support teacher when she retired in 2018. Phyllis has served on a number of committees and boards in Bermuda, such as the Board of Vision Bermuda, formerly the Bermuda Society for the Blind, the BUT Executive Board, the Board of Trustees of Summerhaven, the Board of Directors for the Committee of 25, and she served as the Force Chairman and Coordinator of Volunteers at Windreach, Bermuda, just to mention a few. I'd like to welcome Phyllis Harshaw to come up onto our screen. And then I'm going to share her slides from my computer here. Let me just take a moment for Phyllis to come on up. We'll just give a moment for Phyllis to come on up. So as you heard from Sarah, for our continuing education credits, we will be saying a code word at some point during each presentation. And then we will, you're welcome to email that code word to us at windreach@windreach.bm with your professional designation and name, and we will email back a certificate at some point during next week. All right, Phyllis, I see you, but I don't hear you. Not quite there yet, Phyllis. I know she has to get her computer to talk to her to get it organized. So what I'll do is I'll get us started. So Phyllis is presenting. Ah, there we are. There we are, Phyllis.
It wouldn't, am I in the, is my camera set up okay?
You are. We are ready to get started.
All right. Good morning, everybody.
All right. And Phyllis, you just let me know when you want me to change slides. We're on the history of disabled in Bermuda.
Okay, so before we start, I just wanted to say that every section or topic we'll be talking on can be expanded tremendously. Each topic could be a presentation in itself. So what you're going to see is just a snapshot. So let's continue.
All right, so our first slide is a glimpse of the past. When reviewing the history of the disabled in Bermuda, it is important to review 3 areas: institutions and hospitals, education and employment, change for the disabled, and who were the motivators.
Right, these are the topics we'll be discovering today and talking about, and I'll just be expanding on. Next.
So we've got history of facilities for the disabled. So we've got a picture of St. Brendan's Hospital and Summerhaven.
So the first portion of my talk will be on the facilities in the history of the disabled. Who were they? What were they? Next.
Housing for the disabled in the past. Persons stayed at home often and were kept away from society due to shame. The disabled were housed in institutions, asylums, military hospitals, and convalescent hospitals.
Okay, that is self-explanatory. So in the past, there really were no facilities. So any children or adults with disabilities, whether physical, intellectual, needed a lot of help, would be placed in these places because perhaps the families couldn't really support them, whether financially or physically or medically. So people would be placed in these places, but there was also always a stigma attached to people with disabilities in the past. Continue.
St. Brendan's Psychiatric Hospital, now Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute, MAWI. St. Brendan's Hospital unfortunately housed children and adults with disabilities, both physical and mental. Up until the 1950s and 60s, many disabled persons were usually kept at home or hidden from public view, or forced to live in an institution such as St. Brendan's, the psychiatric hospital, because their families were unable to cope with the demands of caring for them. During this time, mental disabilities affected an average of 3% of all births, and these children were housed in one wing of St. Brendan's Hospital, now known as Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute, MAWI.
So St. Brendan's in the past, as a psychiatric hospital, was deemed as a mental hospital. It wasn't a teaching hospital, it was just a hospital. And that was a facility where a lot of children and adults were placed who needed support. It's a fact whether it was right or not, it is a fact. So we'd like to continue because it'll give you more a perspective on what really Bermuda was like in the past. Continue.
So in the 1970s, a special wing was built for disabled children named the Edna Watson Wing and was a priority for the Committee of 25 until, due to reorganization of the hospital administration, absorbed the wing into the teaching hospital. In recent years, the BHB's Intellectual Disability Program, formerly the Learning Disability Program, is based at the Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute, MWI. The program provides a range of different types of support to adults with intellectual and developmental learning disabilities. Services include 24-hour support in 13 group homes across the island. 2 of the homes are wheelchair accessible.
As you can see, the hospital, St. Brendan's itself, or Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute, has come a long way. They have had programs in the past. Now, the Edna Watson Wing was for children that was specifically for children with severe disabilities. They needed maybe medical help around the clock. It's important to know that now I do not believe that the Edna Watson Wing exists. I think the hospital, with its restructuring, absorbed the wing. But you will see later on the presentation how Edna Watson played an important part as an advocate for the disabled children in Bermuda. Continue.
Children's Convalescent Hospital. The Royal Naval Hospital, Bermuda, the Royal Navy left in the 1950s. From 1953 to 1957, the building was the site of the Children's Convalescent Hospital at Ireland Island, where Leafroy House is today, which filled the need of a home and nursing care for individuals with physical disabilities. It was forced to close 4 years later due to lack of funds. It had begun as the brainchild of the Committee of 25, established by a group of non-Bermudian women. They were led by Canadian-born Edna Watson. The hospital itself was formally decommissioned as the Royal Naval Hospital in 1957. The building, while not well maintained, deteriorated and eventually was purposely burned to the ground.
So Edna Watson, if anybody wants to read an interesting short biography, please go online and read about her. She was involved in a plane crash on her way to Bermuda. She survived and helped others survive, but her big love was children with physical disabilities. She pushed to have the Royal Hospital for a convalescence for children, and she met during that time with a lot of resistance from the community, from government, because, you know, that's something they didn't want to deal with back then. She thought that having the hospital would help parents of these children so that they can go out to work and be supportive while the children got, you know, excellent medical care. The one good thing about the hospital was during a time when there was segregation, she did not care what race, creed, color you were to come there as children. There were no preferential. And also for the staff. Often the hospital was used for nursing staff learning, you know, new nurses. And then again, the nurses, back then, she was a very progressive lady. She didn't care if the nurses were black or white, which is very progressive. Also, I want to say about Edna Watson, she and Hilda Aiken were the first 2 people ever to be elected to the Bermuda government, women who were ever elected to Bermuda government. So this will come up later, but she's a very interesting person, and I urge anybody to really look at her biography. As she said, she started the Committee of 25. What she did was she had 12 of her friends, asked 1 friend each to join with her in helping the children of Bermuda with disabilities. So that's how it became the Committee of 25. She was the one person who didn't have a friend. She had her 12 friends get together. And that's how the Committee of 25 started. Can we go on to the next part?
So, Beacon House Bermuda Society for the Blind. Lady Hall was asked by the governor, Sir Alexander Hood, to form the Bermuda Society of the Blind in January 1957. The Bermuda Society for the Blind was founded by private act by the Lady Gladys Hall, Mr. Russell Eve, and Mr. Russell Bell. Original site was on Burnaby Street. Moved to the Hamilton Hotel, where City Hall is today. When the hotel burned, the society moved back to Burnaby Street. In 1962, after a lengthy fundraising campaign, Beacon House was built at the corner of Cedar Avenue and Dundonald Street and was officially opened by Mr. Russell Bell, becoming the new home for the Bermuda Society for the Blind.
This is interesting because the Bermuda Society for the Blind, even though it's been around for a long time and has its own act, it's one of the few since that time. Now, Lady Gladys Hall was English, and she really wanted to do something for the blind after she was walking through Hyde Park and saw a lot of soldiers from the war who were blind and disabled. So when she came back to Bermuda, she wanted to do something for the Bermudian people, and got together, and she was asked to set up the Bermuda Society for the Blind. The building is still there today, although it's now under renovations. The society provided a lot of interesting things for people with vision loss, but during the past couple of years, it's progressed into a more modern outlook, and I'll talk about that later. Can we go on?
Continued. In 2018, the Bermuda Society for the Blind changed its name to Vision Bermuda to more accurately reflect their mission to serve anyone whose vision loss impacts their day-to-day activities, as well as their families, carers, and also professionals with an interest in vision impairments.
So, as I said, it took an act of Parliament to pass to change the name to Vision Bermuda. We thought it was more progressive, and it kept in line with our new mission. So today, before the renovations and COVID-19, we were providing a lot of services. We have a vision rehabilitation therapist that goes into the homes or in Bermuda and teaches mobility, and he also has classes and individual tutoring at Beacon House. There's other things going on there, and we're expecting a lot more things to happen once the renovations have finished. But in the past, I think the Society for the Blind and Beacon House provided a service that was very important to the thought of persons with disability or blindness at the time. So they were thought to be, as you say, not really, how can I say, able to do things. And back in those times, the thinking was that people with disabilities were not able to do things and basically to keep them busy. So during the time of Beacon House, it did provide an important service for people with blindness. Can we go on to the next one?
Summerhaven. The impetus of Summerhaven derived from Carter's acute awareness of the need for such a residence. A temporary stay at Prospect Geriatric Hospital when her mother was ill had only increased her strong dislike for institutions. Margaret realized the housing challenges other Bermudians with disabilities faced. In March 1984, her dream and hard work was realized with the opening of Summerhaven, a residence providing semi-independent living for people with physical disabilities. Margaret worked with Lady Ramsbotham, wife of the governor, Sir Peter Ramsbotham, and businessman Richard Gorham led the fundraising drive for the $2 million project, for which government provided a pristine property overlooking John Smith's Bay.
Can you go on to the next slide?
Continued, Summerhaven, which can accommodate 18 people, continues to play an important role in addressing the housing needs of people with physical disabilities.
Right. Summerhaven, I served on the Board of Trustees of Summerhaven, and Margaret was put in a geriatric facility, even though she was a young person at the time, because there was no place for her to go for respite when her mother was ill. Nowadays, with Summerhaven providing housing for people with physical disabilities, she saw that need and tried to get the ball rolling with people like Lady Ransbottom and Sir Richard Gorham. The one thing about Summerhaven provided, they had an apartment for people to place relatives if they needed a respite, and the person could stay there while their family had to either have a respite, go away, have surgery, whatever. So there was a place for that person, that relative or friend, to stay with care. Summerhaven still exists today. One of the first persons to stay at Summerhaven was Willard Fox. He still lives there today. And he was one of the people who started the influence with Margaret Carter of change in Bermuda for the disabled. He is outspoken, and he's quite a good advocate for the disabled. Can we go on to the next one?
HOPE Homes. Pat McCann, a Canadian Roman Catholic priest who was attached to St. Anthony's Church in Warwick between 1979 and 1984, helped to found Hope Homes for the mentally disabled, along with Margaret Carter and Ellen Douglas, just to name a few. In 1982, Hope Homes was founded, with HOPE being an acronym for Home of Practical Education. The charity also provided residential care and was response to a government white paper that made a case for deinstitutionalization of developmentally disabled, as in many cases, such individuals had been proven to be capable of learning.
Yes, Hope Homes was one of the first places where adults could stay with intellectual disabilities. Ms. Douglas originated as a teacher at St. Brendan's Hospital, and then she moved on to Hope Homes. It did provide security and a place for people with intellectual disabilities to stay, and education, and she tried to teach them skills for functional skills for daily living and getting them jobs out in the community. Can we go on to the next slide?
Employment for the Disabled Workshops and Sheltered Workshop, now the Opportunity Workshop.
Okay, so we're going to move on from facilities to a different aspect of facilities, which is what they called in the past workshops, which were really a place for people to go and actually stay, learn something, get out of the house for people with disabilities, or work. So we're going to cover a few back in Bermuda's history. Can you continue?
The Sheltered Workshop, which embraced the mental and physical challenges of children of school-leaving age, was established and was housed in a wooden building that was purchased from the U.S. Navy at Kidley Field and moved to a piece of land on Serpentine Road that was purchased under the chairmanship of Commander Godfrey Kitson. The need was so great, it was not long before the building was filled to capacity, and in 1969, the Department of Health and Welfare assumed control and operation.
Is there a continuation of that slide?
No.
So it's always interesting to note that it's an individual who sees the need for something and sparks it, and then government seems to take over in this case. So the Opportunity Workshop was for people with intellectual disabilities and provided skills, daily living skills. It was a day place. It was not an overnight facility or residential facility. People who went there had the ability and the chance to socialize. They were taught social skills if needed. As I said, daily living skills, and quite often they had people who may have given them small jobs to do that were brought into the workshop. I believe the workshop still continues today. Continue.
Bermuda Physically Handicapped Association Workshop. In 1970, the BPHA offered employment opportunities for the disabled with limited skills at its workshop in Prospect. Carter worked at BPHA workshop 2 days a week and conducted much of the BPHA's business, including fundraising from her home on the other days. Her activities including coordinating transport for disabled locals and tourists in 2 vans that had been purchased with private contributions and were manned by a team of volunteer drivers.
Is there a continue?
No.
Okay, sorry.
Anyways.
Margaret Carter, she was a phenomenal woman for the disabled, and I knew her and worked with her. The BPHA, the Bermuda Physically Handicapped Association, was her brainchild, and she developed it. She also raised money for the workshop. She also had people funding the workshop. She had work come in for them, contract work to come in for the people with disabilities. She arranged all these things at the workshop. That was her baby, along with other people on the committee, like Willard Fox. Now, the Bermuda Handicapped Association provided all sorts of support, not only for the physically challenged in Bermuda, but some later on for the intellectually challenged. And the people who were on the board and helping Margaret consisted of people with disabilities and non-disabilities. She really used this committee as a platform for a lot of the changes that were to come in the future. Again, we see an individual starting something in Bermuda. They saw a need, started it, and was activated by it. Now, Margaret was in a wheelchair herself. I'll talk a bit about Margaret later on. Can we go to the next slide?
Bermuda Society for the Blind Workshop. In 1954, the Beacon Club was formed by Miss Jean House, Mr. Lancelot Hayward, and Mr. Abui Rasoul. The members attached to the workshop that provided sheltered employment were taught to make trivets, weave baskets, make stools, and mop heads for sale.
If you notice, the Beacon House started back in the facility. It said 1957. But here we have again an individual, Jean House, who started Beacon Club in 1954. Again, a person who saw a need and filled it. As most of you know, Jean was blind herself. She really felt that people, she had the opportunity as a young girl, because she was blinded as a young girl, to go away and learn Braille and be mobile. And she was a very independent lady. And she started the Beacon Club to provide the people of Bermuda at the time who were blind a place to come to learn Braille. She wanted to teach it to other people, to socialize, and then they eventually learned to make trivets, as we said, baskets. Now you may say, well, that's so menial, but for the time in the 1950s, this was something that the disabled, especially the blind, would learn and then sell their products. I'm sure everybody in Bermuda has a stool or something made by the Society for the Blind, who later took over the Beacon Club, and have them in their home now. But this workshop provided an important facility and club and socializing and learning and education and employment for those who were blind at the time as I said, this was something that was important to have in Bermuda. Things have changed today. Can we move on?
History of education for the disabled.
Coming up, we're going to talk a little bit. The next section is about education in Bermuda for the disabled. Now, when I say the disabled, I mean both physically and intellectually. So we're going to cover both sections here. As I said at the beginning, each one of these areas, each slide, can be a presentation on their own, and I'm just providing a snapshot for this short presentation. Can you continue, please?
Mount St. Agnes School. In 1944, at the age of 5, Margaret Carter attended Roman Catholic Mount St. Agnes, which was the only school in Bermuda willing to accept her as a student. Elliott Extension School, renamed Friendship Vale School. In 1961, Elliott Extension School opened at Prospect as a special needs school for the physically handicapped, visual and hearing impaired initially, with 100 students and 4 women teachers. The school was shortly established after the closure of the Children's Convalescent Hospital. The school was sponsored by the government, believed to have been spurred by the Committee of 25. In 1966, the first teacher of the deaf was on loan from Ontario, Canada, to the school. The school closed in 1993, where students were included into mainstream public schools.
Okay, so let me get back to the first one. The first one was the Mount St. Agnes School. Now, as Margaret, she had muscular dystrophy. She was a very, very bright person. She then became an author, a painter. She was an advocate. She just wanted to go to a regular school. Again, this is 1944. Margaret was still walking at this time. She didn't end up in a wheelchair until she was 11 years old. So in 1944, she would have been about 5 years old. And when you think about it, there was no school except Mount St. Agnes to take her in 1944. This you have to give credit to Mount St. Agnes, because if your own government wouldn't support a child in need, then who could physically move even with some support, this is something that, again, private individuals or institutions will take up the cause, as we saw here. Now, the Elliott Extension, that came about when the Convalescent Children's Hospital closed, and Miss Edna Watson urged the government to open up a school for physically challenged students. So we only know about the Friendship Vale, but before that, and I can only surmise in my research, because they said the Elliott Extension was for physically challenged students, I believe that on the urging of Miss Edna Watson, the government decided to open up a school. They called it the Elliott Extension because, and then changed it to Friendship Vale. I believe that these two schools are the same according to the research. Miss Judith Ingham, who was the principal of Friendship Vale, is still alive today. And the Friendship Vale School closed, I believe, in 1993, before the other schools, special schools, closed in Bermuda. And their students were absorbed in public schools around the island. Now, during that time, the government saw that there were a number of students in wheelchairs, and they had to make certain schools accessible for wheelchairs for these students. I believe the first school was Elliott Primary, and then after that, I believe it was Delwood. At the time, I think Delwood was a middle school or a high school. Those two schools were designated for children in wheelchairs. So as you say, as you see, progress was slow, but it was coming. Can we go on, please?
Orange Valley School, now Dame Marjorie Bean Hope Academy. At At St. Brendan's Hospital, 2 wings of the hospital were designated for education and training for disabled adults and children. One wing was the industrial workshop for adults with intellectual disabilities. The other wing housed a day training center where children with any disability who did not fit into regular schools were placed. Staff assessed children and relocated those who could be placed in special schools. The staff fought for 8 years for a purpose-built facility for children with severe intellectual and/or physical disabilities. As a result, Orange Valley School was purpose-built. The school was renamed Dame Marjorie Bean Hope Academy and continues today.
So this is interesting. The center, day training center at St. Brendan's Hospital, I spoke to Ms. Geraldine Lambert, who worked there at the time. Mary Medeiros was the matron. Now, it was not termed as a school, but it was an education center. And as it said in the presentation in the PowerPoint, that one side, one wing was for adults and one was for children. Now, from what I'm interviewing Mrs. Lambert, children would come there, and the children who came there, who they saw were not so severe that they needed to be there, were then placed in schools with who took children with intellectual disabilities. As you'll see, there were 2 primary schools and 1 senior school. These children could have had intellectual disabilities, they could have academic disabilities, and or both. However, in the other schools, there were, because of mobility problems, for example, there were no ramps in the primary schools. Children who were in wheelchairs could not really attend these schools. So Orange Valley was an extension of a facility that came from St. Brendan's. The school still continues today, and like they said, it's purposely built and provides an important service for children with severe disabilities. Can we go on?
Woodlands, Cedar Grove, and Devon Lane schools. Both of these schools were opened about 1960 and were schools for children with learning disabilities. The children who attended these schools had no mobility challenges. Both schools closed as special schools in June of 1995 with the beginning of inclusion. Devon Lane School was a special education high school. This school took many of the students from Woodlands and Cedar Grove Primary School.
Okay, Woodlands and Cedar Grove were the primary schools. As I said, I worked at Woodland School in 1982 until it closed. 1993 with inclusion. It was a school for children with intellectual disabilities as well as academic challenges. The school had a lot of steps. Children with major mobility problems could not attend the school, or if they did, they relied on teachers to help them up and down the steps to different classes. The school did not provide residential care. It was just a day school. The school started out, now I remember back in, I would say the 1960s, it took children who were older, like a high school. I knew some people back then who were older than me who finished primary school, and then because of schools, because of poor scores, because remember back then you had the 11 plus to get into high school. If you were not accepted in many schools as a high school, a few students had to attend Woodland School. But eventually it turned into a primary school. And then Devon Lane was also a school as well. Now Devon Lane, before it became a high school for children with learning disabilities, Devon Lane was a school, from what I understand from its principal that I interviewed, for students during the 11 plus who could not or were not able to attend the Barclay Institute because of poor scores. They were sent to the facility at Devon Lane School, but at the time it was not called Devon Lane School, and I can't find what it was before it was Devon Lane School. But it took students who were not, I would say, the creme de la creme of the crop for Berkeley Institute. However, the students who went to the school, many of them were extremely successful and in our government in the past. So it was not a school that was specifically for learning disabilities, but people who did not meet the scores or the standards of the Berkeley Institute. Eventually it turned into Devon Lane because, of course, the students from Woodland School, Cedar Grove, and Orange Valley needed somewhere to go. Now, when I say Orange Valley School, there was a specific wing at Devon Lane that were for children with, I would say, functional skills. That it was wheelchair accessible, but they learned life skills there. And they were in between high functioning learning disabled and severely intellectually disabled and physically challenged that would be better supported at Orange Valley or Dame Marjorie. So there was an in-between classroom for these students, and it was housed at Devon Lane. Most of the students who stayed at Devon Lane, or went, when I say stayed, during their time in high school, stayed there. They could stay there until they were about 19 years old. They then either passed out into the workforce, and quite often the teachers there would teach hands-on skills like carpentry and other things, and would also get them work release positions in the community. Many of the students at Devon Lane were very successful and independent citizens in Bermuda with that extra bit of help. Now, the students that were housed in the special wing that were between the severely disabled and the severely learning disabled or academically challenged, they went on to now what we now know and what I've told you about is the Opportunity Workshop. There, their skills were put to use in education, and they continued on with life skills and some jobs as well. So can we go on? By the way, the 3 schools, they all closed in 1995 with the beginning of inclusion.
So Phyllis, I'm just going to give you a time check of 9:51.
Okay, so how much time do I have?
We have about probably about 6 minutes left in order to transition well.
Margaret Carter, can we do that real quick?
Yep. So do we want to do Edna Irene Watson as well?
No, let's do Margaret Carter.
Carter. Okay. We did talk about Edna a bit. So Margaret Carter, 1939 to 1992. A person with a disability due to muscular dystrophy who was confined to a wheelchair from the age of 11. Margaret was the only true advocate for the disabled in Bermuda. It was largely because of her activism that the needs of disabled Bermudians were placed on the national agenda in the 1970s and 1980s. Change was gradual but lasting. It led to more employment opportunities for people with disabilities and heightened public awareness of the need to make buildings and streets in Hamilton accessible to people in wheelchairs.
Continue.
In 1970, she takes out a newspaper advert inviting disabled people to contact her. As a result, the Bermuda Physically Handicapped Association was formed in the same year. It became the forum through which Carter, working with a core group of disabled and able-bodied members, campaigned for jobs and a greater access to public facilities and education and transportation. In 1974, the government conducts a survey to determine the number of disabled people living in Bermuda, which the BPHA called for in its formation. In 1978, the government publishes a report with recommendations for improving the lives of disabled Bermudians.
Okay. This is the beginning of change, and it came for the disabled in Bermuda, and it came because of Margaret. As we continue through this, I want you to really note how she was a force for change in Bermuda. And she was the person who was the catalyst. Since then, really no one has taken up the gauntlet. Can you continue?
In 1981, first time Bermuda observes the Year of the Handicapped. In 1981 also, Bermuda passes the Human Rights Act, which does not adequately address the needs of the disabled. In 1983, Bermuda's first Access Awareness Conference takes place. In 1984, first draft of proposed amendments to the Human Rights Act is shared with the BPHA. Carter publicly rejects some aspects the next year and is chastised by the government. She was also at the forefront of the BPHA's 7-year campaign to amend the 1981 Human Rights Act so that people with disabilities would have legal protection from discrimination.
So all of these things from the first, Alyssa, the first thing was the celebrating the disabled.
Yeah, the Year of the Handicapped.
Yes, it was, all of these things happened because of Margaret Carter. She was the person who started this ball rolling. Everything from now on that we read and in her slide, it was because of Margaret's drive to get change in Bermuda. So can we go on? I realize we're short of time.
In 1988, Parliament passes the long-awaited amendment to the Human Rights Act, a significant victory for the BPHA. In 1990, the government hires a specialist employment officer to match the needs of the disabled with employers. In 1991, in July, a building code went into effect that required public buildings to be accessible. City Hall had led the way in 1980, installing ramps to the city streets, although it would take 11 more years for the Corporation of Hamilton to build ramps at the City Hall itself, in addition to an elevator to give the disabled access to one of the 2 art galleries on the 2nd floor.
I would like to say here, if we go back, you'll see all of these acts in Parliament was because of Margaret, and she fought for that. But if you go back, what I find very interesting is that in 1990, if you look at that one, Alyssa, it said that an employment officer, was that correct? An employment, did you read that line?
Government hires a specialist employment officer to match the needs of the disabled with employers.
So this really upset me, because what happened to this person? What happened to this post? So you have something like that in the past. Does that mean that after the post was discontinued, the government thought that there were no more disabled people? So a lot of this is, you know, change came about because of Margaret. And I know if Margaret was still alive today, we would still have an employment officer. When we go on, can you go on?
Yep. Final quote. A hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles. Christopher Reeve.
Okay, this is the end of my presentation, but I just want to say about Margaret Carter for the accessibility. I was on the committee for her for the accessibility access awareness. I was on a committee with her with Summerhaven. I was on many things helping her, and she was relentless, absolutely relentless. She was not afraid to challenge government, and out of everybody, she is the person who I believe speared the changes that we have today, even with the Human Rights Act. When it was not adequate enough, she just rejected it. Margaret caught a lot of flack by government and other people, but she knew what was right. I miss her terribly, and I think the community misses her because she was the real advocate for change in Bermuda. I hope you enjoyed my presentation today, and like I said, it's just a snapshot.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. Maybe what if we have any questions, perhaps people can email us at windreach@windreach.bm, and we can maybe pass any questions on to you that are appropriate.
Sure.
Okay, so if anyone has any questions that we don't really have time to address now so that we can move on to our next session, feel free to email us at windreach@windreach.bm. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for that awesome talk and for all that information. There is so much to know and such a short time to learn it.
That's right, that's right.